Hi, Ivani from Clubscraft, where we help sports coaches spend more time with their athletes. And today we are going to talk about how much times individual athletes need to spend in different training zones based on the events they want to participate in and all the repercussions this training volume has on their performance. So let's dive right in. The first thing we have to keep in mind is that it's very different to train for a 5K or 10K run as opposed to a marathon, for example, or if you are training for a sprint triathlon, it's very different from an Ironman distance or long distance triathlon. Even if you're going into the ultra distances, this is a very different beast. So you have to keep in mind on how much training you need to put into each individual training zone to get the most benefit from your training. The image to my left, you can see that the amount of time an athlete needs to spend varies considerably based on the target event duration. So if you are on the shorter side of your running race or triathlon race or cycling race, you will spend a lot of time in zones 3, 4, and 5 because you need to build up this top level speed in order to carry you as fast as possible through the event. But if you go into the 2 to 4 hour range, you will have to dial down the top speed work, so the anaerobic threshold work, and use a lot more the zone 3, zone 2 workouts. And then as this gets even longer into the 4 to 8 or even into 13 plus hours, you will simply not be able to spend a lot of time in those speed workouts because they will not give you the benefit that you need. You have to be constantly working on building your aerobic threshold as wide as possible or as high as possible so that you can sustain those demands that the individual race distance puts on your body. One of the mistakes that a lot of new endurance athletes make is to spend too much time and training too often at high intensity levels because it just feels nice when you are able to run faster and faster during those workouts. But unfortunately, they will not be able to sustain those speeds at those long events like a half marathon or a marathon. So they need to work a lot more on building their aerobic capacities to their full potential. One of the ways you can assess if your athlete has the needed aerobic capacity to sustain the efforts of a given event is to have them train for a certain amount of time that is roughly equal to the event duration they are planning to participate in. Obviously, if you go into long distance running or cycling or even ultra distances, you won't be able to do these things, but you can replicate the same training load by having multiple long days that your athlete is going to be working with. And in order to see if the aerobic capacity has been developed or not, one of the things you can do is to compare how their power output or pace changes throughout the workout in relation to their heart rate. And ideally, you want to keep the heart rate and power output or pace as parallel as possible. This is a great indication that your athlete's aerobic capacity has been fully developed, and you can then start adding more race specific efforts into the training regime. If the power output or pace stays the same while the heart rate starts climbing throughout the workout, you still have to develop their aerobic capacity. And similarly, if their heart rate stays the same but their power output or pace starts to decline towards the end of the workout, this is again an indication that they still need to develop their aerobic capacity. Terminology that explains this is called cardiac drift, and we are talking about a workout being coupled or decoupled. So if the drift is bigger than 5%, it's going to be a decoupled workout, while if it stays within the margin of 5%, then your aerobic capacities have fully developed and your workout is considered coupled. At the beginning of a season, it's more advisable to try and keep the heart rate constant and then just monitor how the pace or power output changes. But once you cross the base phase and go into the build phase, it's more advisable to try and keep the pace and power output constant, and then just monitor what happens with your heart rate, because the closer you are to your target event, the more you want to train in race specific pacing zones and power zones. Another thing that's very important to keep in mind is that you have to take into account the events that you are training for. So if you're training, for example, for a half marathon, and you have those long runs, and it seems that all your workouts or your long runs are coupled, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have the aerobic capacity to run a marathon. So having the aerobic fitness for a shorter event doesn't mean that you have automatically the capacity to run also longer events, while the reverse is certainly true, because if you are able to run a marathon at a constant speed, you will certainly be able to run a half marathon or a 10K with no problem. And the last thing that I want to talk about, and this is something that's really helped me understand my training process and helped me gain a lot of insight into how I need to train to get the most out of my workouts, is the trifecta of form, fitness, and fatigue. Form and fatigue basically represent the different sides of a coin. So the more fatigued you are, the less you are ready for a given event. And once you start resting, and once we remove the fatigue, your readiness will also, your form will improve, and you will be ready for a race. Fitness is the product of all the training sessions that you are executing in a given period, and it's a delicate balance between having a lot of hard sessions and a lot of long sessions, and enough recovery between all of those ones. On the left side, you can see one of my performance charts from 2 years ago, and you can see a sharp decline in my fitness. That's the blue line, because that's when I got COVID and I simply couldn't train for around 2 months. But once I was fully recovered, I started training again for some events in the next year. And you can see that my fatigue was basically at a low point, because I haven't trained for 2 months, so there wasn't basically any fatigue. And the race readiness, the form or orange line, is at its maximum, and then it started to decline once I started adding more training sessions. And you can see the blue line, which represents my fitness, going steadily up. There were a few dips which were related to some vacations that I had, but it's always a process of training hard and improving your fitness, and then easing off a little bit on those recovery weeks and longer rides, where we allow the body to calm down a little bit, to absorb all the damage. And fitness is going to slightly decline. The fatigue is going to go much quicker away than your fitness. So if you leave just enough room for your fatigue to go away, your fitness will stay roughly at the same level, and then you can pile up a new cycle of intense training sessions, long workouts, and continue the cycle up until your race where you want to perform. And the last week or two, depending on how long your event is, are the most critical, because you want to keep the intensity as high as possible, but you also want to allow the athlete's body to start recovering, so that the form is going to be positive and they are ready to execute the race as they plan. One of the things that a lot of athletes, and myself included, have problems with is the fact that in order to be ready for a race, you have to slow down. You have to stop piling on intense workouts. You need to start doing some easier sessions and recover a little more. The drawback of this is, of course, that your fitness is going to decline, but it's always better to let your fitness drop just a little bit, but come to a race well rested, than to chase some arbitrary numbers and then come fatigued to a race and not execute and put all the work that you've put into the last months for the book that really helped me understand all of these concepts and get a grasp on how I should prioritize my training, my recovery, and my racing plans is the book, The Triathlete's Training Bible by Joe Friel, who is one of the most recognized experts in endurance training or in triathlon training in the world. We will dive into a lot more stuff that I really find interesting in the coming weeks. So I really hope you stay tuned, and I see you next time. Bye bye.